I stood frozen, my jaw slack, as my wife opened her robe to reveal that she was completely undressed. Her toned body was laid bare before me. Staring at her, I managed to choke out, "What's going on here?" She quickly covered herself, her eyes meeting mine with an unsettling calmness. "For 20 years, I've been loyal to you," she said, her voice steady but carrying an unmistakable weight. "Even though many men pursued me, I always turned them down. But now, I've decided to accept one of their offers. Whether you like it or not, I'm going to spend the night with him. He'll be here soon." I didn't speak a word. Instead, I walked to the safe, retrieved my magnum, and declared, "I'll end him," without hesitation. Meanwhile, James, a middle-aged man from Chicago, sat alone in his dimly lit living room, nursing a glass of whiskey after another grueling day at work. The amber glow of the fireplace cast a soft light around the room, reflecting the familiar comfort of his 20-year marriage to Sarah. As he leaned back in his recliner, his thoughts drifted to their years together. He remembered the early days filled with laughter, passion, and love. Though the years had dampened the excitement, he still held deep affection for Sarah, even if he couldn't ignore the monotony that had crept into their lives. Just as his eyelids grew heavy and he started to drift off, Sarah entered the room, snapping him back to the present. She stood there for a moment, her presence unmistakable. Draped in a white silk robe, her face was a mixture of determination and vulnerability, an expression James hadn't seen in years. She remained silent, allowing the weight of her arrival to settle before taking a deep breath. Then, with a slow motion, she untied the robe and let it fall open, exposing her flawless, toned body. James was stunned, unable to form words as he processed what was happening. Before he could speak, Sarah's voice broke the silence, firm but laced with emotion. What she said next would forever alter their marriage, pulling James into a whirlwind of disbelief and confusion. As her robe fluttered open, the room seemed to grow heavy with the tension that filled the space between them. Sarah's voice was steady but emotional as she confessed something that would shatter everything James thought he knew about their life together. For 20 years, she had been faithful to him despite many men pursuing her. But now she had finally decided to accept the advances of one who had relentlessly pursued her. She declared her intent to spend the night with him, regardless of how James felt. Each word felt like a blow, breaking the fragile peace James had been reflecting on only moments before. He sat motionless, stunned by the revelation, unable to grasp what he was hearing. His wife, the woman he had built his life with, was telling him she was about to betray everything they had. His face betrayed the confusion and simmering anger beneath the surface. As Sarah pulled the robe partially closed, a gesture that somehow felt calculated, James's mind was racing. He was caught between love and betrayal, two emotions clashing with overwhelming force. His memories flooded back, a montage of their life together. He saw their wedding day, Sarah walking down the aisle, radiant and full of promise. He remembered the sleepless nights, the shared laughter, and the quiet moments of joy. But now, everything was changing. The weight of her words was more than he could bear. James's thoughts raced as memories of their life together flashed through his mind. He thought of the countless nights spent caring for their children, the laughter they shared during vacations, and the serene evenings spent in each other's arms. But now, those moments felt like a distant dream, colliding violently with the present. He was torn between an overwhelming sense of betrayal and a searing fury that seemed to swallow him whole. As if the weight of Sarah's revelation wasn't enough, she delivered one final crushing blow. The man she planned to meet that night would soon be at their doorstep. Her calm demeanor in the face of such an announcement left James both enraged and bewildered. His chest tightened, and his breath quickened as the gravity of her words sank in. His anger, which had simmered quietly, now erupted. Without speaking a word, he made a decision. His expression turned cold and unreadable, his resolve clear. Sarah's gaze followed him as he crossed the room, moving past the family photos that lined the walls, each one a symbol of a life now crumbling. He walked to the safe, and the metallic click of the lock breaking the silence sounded like a final verdict. From the safe, James pulled out his Magnum revolver, a weapon he had kept hidden for years. But now, it was in his hands, and his grip on it was unshakable. The air in the room became thick with tension as Sarah watched, her heart pounding. They were standing on the edge of something neither could predict. The line between love and betrayal had already been crossed, and nothing would ever be the same. The room was eerily silent as James approached the coffee table, his eyes burning with a fury Sarah had never seen before. He placed the gun down on the table with an almost deliberate calmness. Every movement was measured, but his eyes betrayed the storm raging inside him. "I will end him," he said, his voice chillingly steady. His words hit the air like a sharp knife, cutting through the tension. Sarah's confidence faltered. She had never seen him like this before. His calm exterior now radiated an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. She had never expected such a reaction, one so raw and primal. But before she could process her feelings, a sound from the door broke the silence. The doorbell rang, cutting through the tension like a knife. Both of them froze, their emotions colliding with the stark reality of the situation. Sarah instinctively glanced toward the door, while James, his anger and adrenaline mixing, grabbed the Magnum again without a word. James moved with purpose, each step heavy with resolve as he made his way toward the front door. The tension was thick, every moment stretching endlessly, drawing the audience's attention to its peak. When his hand reached for the doorknob, the weight of anticipation felt almost unbearable. But as the door swung open, the figure standing there was not the man James had expected. It wasn't the romantic rival he had braced himself for. Instead, standing before him was Mark, an old and trusted friend, someone who had been a confidant to both James and Sarah throughout their years together. Mark stood there, puzzled but calm, completely unaware of the storm that was swirling just inside the house. The unexpected twist hit James like a shockwave, obliterating all assumptions. James stared at Mark, his grip on the gun loosening as his anger shifted to confusion. He turned back towards Sarah, searching her face for an explanation. The confrontation that had been building toward an explosive moment now seemed to teeter on the edge of something far deeper. Sarah's composed facade finally broke. Her eyes welled with tears as she confessed the truth. This wasn't about another man. There was no lover waiting in the shadows. The dramatic scene she had staged, the bold declarations, had all been a desperate attempt to provoke some kind of reaction from James. Her tears began to flow freely as she shared her frustrations, revealing how, for years, she had felt neglected and unappreciated. She longed to reignite the passion that had once defined their relationship, a passion that now seemed so far out of reach. Her heartache poured out as she admitted how desperately she needed to know whether James still cared enough to fight for their love, to remind her that she was still the woman he once adored. James, now overwhelmed by the raw vulnerability in her voice, slowly placed the gun on a nearby table. The truth in Sarah's words cut through his anger, forcing him to face the reality of his own neglect in their marriage. The weight of what she had said settled over him, and he realized that beneath her extreme actions lay a deep need for reconnection, a yearning for the love they had shared. As the tension in the room began to lift, James's anger ebbed away, replaced by a sobering clarity. Standing amidst the aftermath of their emotional collision, James finally saw his wife in a new light. He wasn't looking at the woman he had grown alongside over the years. He was looking at the vibrant, loving partner he had once promised to cherish. Slowly, he set the Magnum down on the table, its menacing presence no longer necessary. The silence that followed was thick, and then James spoke, his voice softened now but filled with sincerity. He admitted his fault in allowing the spark in their relationship to fade. He acknowledged that, in the comfort of their shared life, he had taken Sarah's love for granted. The realization stung, and his voice was laced with regret as he vowed to do better, to reignite the passion they had once known, and to never again allow her to feel invisible in their marriage. As Sarah listened, still glistening with tears in the firelight, The walls she had built around her frustrations began to crumble. She acknowledged that her actions had been extreme and deeply painful. Sarah, still reeling from the weight of the night's events, spoke softly, admitting that her actions had been unfair. She regretted pushing James to such a fragile emotional point, but beneath the regret, there was a sense of relief. Despite everything, their marriage still mattered enough to evoke such a passionate reaction from him. What had begun as a desperate attempt to rekindle the love between them now sparked a glimmer of hope. Maybe this could mark a new beginning. James, sensing her vulnerability and the depth of her emotion, moved closer. Without hesitation, he enveloped her in his arms. The intensity of the moment faded as they held each other, their shared pain and affection weaving together. It was a silent promise, a reaffirmation of their bond and of the life they had worked so hard to build. Mark, still standing in the doorway, had only caught glimpses of the emotional battle that had just unfolded. Though the full details eluded him, he understood the weight of what had transpired. He offered a small, knowing smile and quietly excused himself, leaving James and Sarah alone. As the door clicked shut, the outside world seemed to vanish, leaving them in a cocoon of reconciliation. The storm of emotions that had threatened to tear them apart now settled into a quiet, intimate peace. The scene shifted, and the couple found themselves sitting together on the couch. The flickering warmth of the fireplace cast a soft glow over them. Though they were still visibly shaken, there was a sense of relief in the air. They took a moment to process everything, the raw emotions, the hurt, and the fragile bridge they had rebuilt. The silence between them was no longer thick with tension, but comfortable, as if they shared an understanding that they had just narrowly avoided losing what they had built over the past 2 decades. After a moment, Sarah broke the stillness with a soft laugh, shaking her head in disbelief. "I can't believe it took all this just to get us to talk," she said, her voice tinged with both humor and regret. James smiled, the first real smile of the evening, and chuckled at the absurdity of the situation. "Well, if you want a reaction, you certainly got one," he replied, squeezing her hand. Their laughter filled the space, washing away the lingering tension from the night. The mood shifted again, but this time it was filled with optimism. They spoke openly about the cracks that had formed in their marriage over the years. Sarah confessed how much she had longed for the connection they once shared, while James promised he would never again let her feel unnoticed or undervalued. They made a pact, one to rediscover the love and passion that had once united them. "We'll start fresh," James said, his voice steady. "This time, we'll get it right." The scene closed on them, leaning into each other, hands entwined. The quiet moment between them was tender and peaceful. The camera lingered on their profiles, illuminated by the fire's warm glow, a subtle reflection of the renewed love between them. As the screen faded to black, James's voice resonated in a final reflection. "Love isn't something you just find. It's something you build every day, even when life tries to pull you apart," he said. His words carried a message of hope, a reminder that even when relationships seem on the verge of collapse, they can be reignited if both partners are willing to fight for them. The screen went dark, leaving the audience with a sense of closure and inspiration. It was a reminder that love, while sometimes fragile, can be rekindled if both are willing to make the effort.